Greetings everybody around the world. It's time once again for Ancient Aliens Radio. This is the dedicated radio show for the cast of Ancient Aliens. Here we interview authors and researchers as an ongoing investigation into the ancient alien theory. Don't forget to like us on Facebook or subscribe to the YouTube channel Ancient Aliens Radio. In just a moment I'm going to be speaking to Ross Hamilton. We're going to be reviewing his book, The Mystery of the Serpent Mound in Search of the Alphabet Gods. And what a book it is. It's an awesome, prolific research. Wow, it's a minefield of esoteric to archaeoastronomy knowledge on the Serpent Mound. It's not Ross's most recent book on Serpent Mound, but we're maybe going to do a follow-up show on that. Without further ado, let's bring on our guest. Hi, Ross.
Hello, James. Thank you. Great to have you on. Well, great to have me on your show.
Oh, for sure. It's great to have you. I know last time we had a little chit chat, we got very excited and, we almost broke into a show. And, you know, Russ, I love mounds. I love archaeoastronomy. You look like a passionate guy that's been researching this topic. It must have took you a long time to write this book, Ross. It's prolific.
It did take a long time, James. It took probably 15 years of doing this kind of research.
Wow. Tell me before, just for the listeners there, because I'm all over between Spain and Ireland, UK and USA, and some people might not be familiar with this site, Ross, although it has got a lot of attention since Ancient Aliens brought it to the surface. But tell us a little bit of geographic information, where it's situated. The size of this thing is something like a quarter of a mile long, and you know, there's some anomalies about where it's located. So maybe just get some of the geographic information in first and build a little picture for the audience, Ross.
Okay. If you have a map of the eastern United States up, go to Ohio, go to the middle of the state, and then work your way down to the southernmost part of the state, just about, let's say 10 miles up from the Ohio River, and that's the location of Serpent Mound.
Mm-hmm. It's on if I understand, it's on a crater as well, Ross, an unusual, geological formation that it actually sits on.
Yes, it's on what we used to call a crypto explosion feature because we didn't realize that it was actually a comet or a meteor, crater for a long time because of the antiquity of the explosion. And it was monstrous too. It created a crater that was, at the time, it could have been something in excess of 10 miles wide or more. Now, geologists trace it pretty satisfactorily for about 4 kilometers, 5 kilometers in width, and it's fairly circular. The Serpent is on the western portion of it, pretty close to the western edge. Mm-hmm. But again, the Serpent is probably closer to the middle part of it, if you wanted to measure, if you go from the original massive size of it. Now, when this occurred, it created faults and fissures and just an enormous amount of destruction. It liquefied the rock because the impact was so great. Wow. Down several miles. Of course, we still go by miles here in the United States. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting about the Serpent Mound impact crater is that way down where it impacted the rock, and we're going down miles, it met with another anomaly that scientists really don't understand what it is. It just seems to have a great deal of magnetic energy associated with it.
Wow.
A great deal of power associated with it. And the speculation is that it connects directly with the mantle of the Earth. So, you know, for those of you who enjoy the idea of the Serpent being a place of power, in other words, the possibility that the Serpent may one day begin to tap into a vast amount of power from deep within the Earth. This is a smorgasbord because when you hear the rest of the information about the architecture of the Serpent and you envision it as John Michel used to envision it, as, along with the Greek architectures and the Egyptian and so forth, as places that utilize the energies of the earth and bringing them to a fine focus in order to affect weather changes and so forth, healing energies, then I think you'll come to appreciate the Serpent Mound as a real masterwork.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's so many angles to talk about here today, Ross. Let's concentrate on the earth energies for the moment, but you have them all encompassed in the book, and wonderful research book for me as well on Serpent Mound, and been dying to do the show for a long time. Earth energies, Ross, I mean, we're talking some sort of electromagnetic energy at this place. Could humans feel it there? Is there a sense that humans can go there and actually sense it directly, or are we talking measurable phenomena with scientific equipment?
Both. That's one of the beauties about Serpent Mound, and what we love to tell people about, especially when we get them into the park, is that this place is amazing because not only can you measure these things with the correct scientific instrumentation, but also sensitive people can relate to these same phenomena because there are, parts of the energies here, and there are different kinds of energy. There's gravitational anomalies, magnetic anomalies, photoelectric anomalies, anomalies having to do with the way electrical and magnetic forces affect water, vapor. So it's the understanding that there are things that instruments can't measure that are readily measurable by sensitive people. For example, on a typical spring day, like today, if you were out there, especially if the sun were shining, when you go out on the escarpment that the Serpent is constructed upon, the interaction between the sky above and the earth below produces a sort of magnetic anomaly that, combined with the evaporation of the water from the recent rains, can cause the arm hairs, or actually all the hairs in your body, to want to lift up. So people get chills when they go out there. And the interesting thing about this, James, is that people have their prayers answered when they go out there. It's like some sort of a special outdoor temple. And even the most material-minded archaeologists will speak of the Serpent Mound in reverential terms, especially if they have the opportunity to do work here and research. People have visions here. People go into meditation. They find a tree or a private area somewhere in the vicinity of the Serpent, because we keep people off the mound itself, of course. And they will immediately lapse into a deep sense of concentration and the ability to be able to focus their attention inward or upon a prayer or a request for revision. And so you have any number. We could compile a book of stories of inner experiences at Serpent Mound, as well as external experiences.
Wow. So fascinating, Ross. This is awesome. You're talking now and describing this place, in modern times today, that people can go there. It's like a spiritual center or a pilgrimage where people could go and literally, embrace the monument.
Yes.
Do you think that was an original function for this, Ross?
Well, I do, and that isn't touched upon so much in the Mystery of the Serpent Mound, but I do cover it in Starmound's Legacy of the Native American Mystery more. The connection to the other earthen structures in the Ohio Valley is very much astronomical. Many of your readers, your readers, of course, you're a published author, but many of your listeners are familiar with Glastonbury.
Yeah, sure.
And the fact that Glastonbury Tor, which is central, is often regarded by some researchers as the central of an ancient astrological / astronomical plan that may have incorporated the bringing together of earth energies to be focused at the Tor in order to be transformed into perhaps healing energies that were subsequently redistributed throughout the heavenly village that Glastonbury is once believed to have been by true believers.
Sure.
And a similar function may have been with the Serpent Mound. Native American legend teaches us that the actualization of real power is intimately linked with the downloading, if you will, of the energy of the clouds, perhaps in the form of lightning. And of course, we have our Thunderbird mythologies, the bringers of the lightning to the earth. And they were always hunting for the serpent. So I believe that the serpent was central to, acting like a sort of Tor, because it is on a massive outcropping of dolomite, which is a semiconductor.
Wow, dolomite's incredibly interesting in terms of geological.
Yes. And that the serpent could have served as a distribution point for energies that could have affected much of the Ohio Valley, especially if you have similarly receptive stations dotting the landscape in all directions. And that we did. We have a series of ancient lodges that surround the serpent, both physically and astronomically, and I'll explain to you what I mean, that suggest that the serpent was at the center of their religious and cosmological temperament.
Wow. Totally fascinating, Ross. This, to me, as an outsider looking at the USA and its monuments, this was one of the most precious monuments. Is there a recognition for this as such an important monument, Ross? Do the public awareness of this place, do they see it as such a significant place?
That's very interesting. I'm glad you asked that question because, basically, because of the abuse that the European invasion sort of placed upon native societies, and because their lands were held to be quite valuable, a great deal of disrespect was shown for native people and as well as their antiquities. And as a result of that, because they were made of earth and stone, they weren't given the same kind of recognition that the 18th century began to heap upon the antiquities of South America, Central America, Egypt, and Greece, and so forth. And the North American mound building culture wasn't even recognized as being significant architecturally until this past century, actually more in this current century, when a great deal of effort is being placed using, the expanded educational facilities we have with the internet to kind of put into a finer perspective of classic architectural knowledge these earth and stoneworks. Now, I don't want to divert attention or digress, but the fact that our monuments were made of earth really did not help them to stand the test of time like the Egyptian pyramids did. But people tend to want to destroy old things. For one reason or another, we've lost most of the antiquities. The pyramids are still there. But the only reason, for example, Göbekli Tepe is available to us now is because it was buried secretly and nobody knew about it.
Sure.
And of course, the earthworks were obviously easy to destroy, and because of farming concerns that took over the landscape during the 17 and 1800s, most of them were leveled to make room for growing crops. But a few were preserved, and one of those was the Great Serpent Mound. Now, when you want to get into the esoteric understanding of it, my opinion of the serpent and the other outlying earthen structures, which we call lodges, which were non-burial. They were all, geometrical,
symbolic, and
symbolic, right?
Yeah.
They are actually efforts that were made by what we call the Adena and Hopewell people who lived here between 2,500 years ago and 1,500 years ago. to reconstruct, marking the foundations of a yet older culture who had finished its cultural flourish and architectural flourish about 5,000 years ago, about the time that the Egyptians picked it up, and about the time that parts of the Fertile Crescent became a little more erudite, and of course going back to the time when the Greeks had the roots of their wonderful golden age in the first millennium. So there's a great deal of Archimedean, Pythagorean, and other of the old Greek master mathematicians, Euclidean mathematics and geometrics that are encoded in these earthworks, and they're not very hard to dig them out either.
Yeah.
Now, we did make maps of them, so we have a pretty good idea of what they look like, even though most of them have succumbed to destruction. And using the Serpent Mound as a sort of template, we've been able to discern that it can explain not just the circle and the square, and of course the three-dimensional cube with some fair erudition, but also the Pythagorean theorem itself, and perhaps more remarkably, several applicable, maybe not traditional, but applicable manifestations of the golden ratio in various forms. The pentangular form, the arbulos form, which was introduced by Archimedes, the form of the golden box, the form of the golden curve. All these can be demonstrated by the Serpent Mound using those geometrical concepts as background for laying the serpent over it, like an architect's serpent, like a template. So I postulate in the mystery of the Serpent Mound that Pythagoras got a hold of this template and named it his Python. And of course, Manly Hall, the
Manly P. Hall, yes.
Yeah, Manly Hall, who founded the Philosophical Research Society, who was privy to philosophic tradition going back thousands of years, said that it is held by initiate philosophers that Pythagoras was a re-embodiment of Apollo. And so he was able to really encapsulate a lot of the of the Apollonian knowledge into Pythagorean knowledge. And as a result of that, we were able to inherit by way of the Essenes, who in turn sought to gather together the scattered Pythagorean college, much of what the Gnostics considered to be the Christian mysteries and so forth. So the serpent, in a roundabout way, does give a background for much of what we consider mystical Christianity. Although, if you take the ego out of mystical Christianity and just apply its antique philosophical tenets, you can discover not just the universal understanding of the Christos and the numbers and the geometries of the fish and so forth involved in Serpent Mound, but also the very concept of the word or logos, which Apollo slew as the Python to create the first alphabet, the Olympian alphabet, which was later reconstructed by Pythagoras to become the Greek alphabet. I've had some criticism of this concept, but I postulate that the serpent was slain by Apollo. The serpent Python was slain by Apollo about the time of the zenith of the last pole star, which is the same thing that was done when Mithras slew the bull, because the bull was going out. The age of Taurus was making way for the age of Aries, so Mithras slew the bull to make way for Aries coming in. This is well known by scholars. But what's not so well known is that Apollo slew the Python because the last pole star, which the Python had at its heart, was moving out more toward the current pole star Polaris. And if you look at Serpent Mound, you'll see that that pole star is right there at the geographic center. And so it wasn't very hard to match up the constellation Draconis with the Serpent Mound.
Wow. What a body of knowledge you have on this place, Ross. I mean, just on the Earth energies, you know, I think there's iridium deposits there as well. That must give off a lot of energy. The iridium is found in crater sites. I think it's an incredibly rare element.
Well, yeah, the iridium controversy, that was pretty funny. You know, Ancient Aliens had me on their show, and
sure.
And one of their producers, you know, is always looking for ways to make it more, you know, advertising worthy. And
sure.
So he created that iridium controversy, and he sort of pieced together parts from the interviews that they'd done with me over several hours to make it appear as though I was encouraging the belief of iridium.
Wow.
Iridium. I wasn't actually, but that doesn't mean that iridium has not been found in the crater.
Sure.
It just hasn't been found at the Serpent Mound site.
Okay. But on the Dolomite angle, I mean, that's an incredibly electromagnetic. It's got to be major energy place just on the Dolomite outcrop.
Right. Well, you know, energies as they come up from the Earth, and of course, the Serpent Mound is a raised effigy built upon a sort of pedestal, or like a plinth structure. You know, like an artist creates a plinth in order to create a statuary on top of it. Well, the serpent rests upon a plinth that's roughly in the shape of the serpent, and it seems to have been carved away. Now, John Michel, and I'm getting to the electrical forces, John Michel notes in his view over Atlantis, or a new view over Atlantis, that when the Atlantis empire was beginning to fade back into the etheric zone, they sent out 12 ships. Of course, Donovan talks about the 12 masters of Atlantis that were sent out. But Michel's a little more down to earth on that subject. He says that they created massive tables and cyclopean structures in different parts of the earth in order to found their philosophical constructs upon. And these were all the colonies of ancient Atlantis. And of course, they've all been swept away. And one of those is the Acropolis. Now, the Greeks have a history that goes back to the very end of Atlantis among their folk traditions. And they say that the Acropolis was used way back when as a fitting sanctuary for Athena, and that it's been millennia have passed, and they have reconstructed the Acropolis buildings, but they have maintained a strict reverence for Athena through it. Now, this is just a good example. I'm using it.
Sure.
Because all over the earth, these structures were made. The Glastonbury Tor is an artificial construct that was created as a raised area against a lower plane, because electromagnetic energy is generated from within the earth and formulated by the grid of the earth tend to become more refined and more specific in their polarities the higher they go. So the Serpent Mound, Glastonbury Tor, the Acropolis, and other sites were created long ago by technology that we don't understand, because they were quite good at moving large blocks of stone in order to create these effigies or these tributes to the gods on top of them. In other words, to be able to reconvene this interaction that occurs between sky and earth. Now, the Greeks believed in Uranus and Gaia, and they believed that there was a sort of sexual relationship between the sky god and the earth mother that produced offspring, whether you call them the Titans or the giants or the Olympians or what have you. These were the names given to astrological or astronomical ages, in the opinion of some. But they were also temple systems that were used during the Atlantean period that successfully converted sky energies, internally combining them with earth energies in order to create these medicinal energies that spread across the surface of the earth and maintained a permanent golden age. It was when we lost the ability to maintain these stations, these earth-sky orientated stations, that we began to fall into darkness again, and the earth began to produce heat beneath her mantle. Now, what the purpose of the serpent was to have a place on the earth where you can tap into these energies without any fear of them being thwarted by the movement of plates and the excessive accumulation of heat. And so if the serpent, for example, were to be reactivated and began to distill the energies of the sky with the energies of the earth, which is quite competent to pull out of the earth because of the depth of its base structure, we would see an almost continuous interaction, creating this stuff that the ancients call mana, or amrit, or in India they call it amrita, or vitality. It's something that contains the universal life force, the logos within it. And the serpent, of course, was slain by Apollo because it was the image of the universal, contained all the knowledge of the earth and the sky, the alchemy. But let me just explain to you for a minute what it does astronomically. The serpent's situated with a north-south alignment. Now, mind you, it's receiving all these energies, right? It's going full tilt.
Sure.
And it's not made of earth necessarily. It's decked out with mica, precious minerals, and really made into a showpiece by the native people.
Wow.
And it's taking the energies of the earth and sky and is converting them into life force energy. And of course, the Cherokees say that there was a crystal at the head of the serpent, the Octina, that was called Ulanyasut, the crystal that shone a light brighter than the sun at noonday. Now, native people believe that these lamps that were on their manitous, which is their spirit figures, their spirit animals, and the Manitou system was all over the eastern United States, were capable of producing a light that would throw into disillusion the light of the surrounding wilderness. Now, the same thing could have happened in Glastonbury. If there was a dragon on top of Glastonbury one time, a dragon made by the art of the ancient wizards, if you will, the philosophers of the olden days, then that dragon could have successfully converted, just like the Chinese dragons holding that jewel in their mouth, or the Serpent Mound holding the sun in its jaws, that energy into those jewels, which would convert them into a transcendental light, which would allow, or have allowed the people access to the other world, the Avalons and the paradise worlds of the fairy kingdoms, or where the gods at one time were, access to the still extant Atlantean Empire. So, mind you, all this is going on in Serpent Mound, but the serpent is righteously constructed so that it harbors in its coils all of the lights of the sun and moon. It's a sort of righteous architectural, let's call it a skillful conflagration of universal knowledge, that once that figure was properly endowed with its alignments to the sun and the moon, the stars, the earth, and then when it was going through all of its manufacturing of this life force energy, it would have become truly a holy sight. And what makes it reverential to this day is that the 7 coils of the serpent seem to harbor alignments with the sun and the moon, because there's an orientation of the serpent to true north. Now, You should jump in here, James, because you're just going to let me go on.
Wow, well, you're talking such, I've read the book, Ross. It's awesome. I'm just fascinated when you're orating this information. There's so much information to come out, and the astronomy, the location, the earth energies, the mathematics, the geometry. Ross, we're talking, whoever built this monument, we'll get into that later too, but we're talking the intention of high science, high technology, and knowledge, these are not primitive people building this monument, Ross. This is highly complex.
Yes. Yeah, it's complex, but it's been reduced to an earthwork, you see. Mm. And so it has this sort of innate humility.
Yeah.
That humility was not recognized until just very recently as something that's harboring a great intelligence, a great erudition, formulated the design of Serpent Mound, and that's what I've been attempting, mm-hmm. and I've had fortunately some success too. I didn't think I would at first. Attempting to put across to the archaeologists and the anthropologists and just the everyday tourist that comes there that the previous vision of Serpent Mound that was leveled upon us from the time I was a child was that this is an interesting earthwork, but it's basically made of clay and earth. And we think it has something to do with the primitive religion of a Stone Age culture that hadn't really become aware of itself enough to recognize that it was isolated from the rest of the world. Yeah. And of course, you were taught this when you were a child.
Yeah.
And because I was initiated by an Indian master, mm-hmm. And because I began to read all about the other ancient monuments of the world and then being switched on by John Michel's writings, and I realized Michel is controversial as well, but I came to the understanding that Serpent Mound and many of these earthworks in the Ohio Valley especially were designed by an intelligence that we do not or have not attributed to Native American people. Mm-hmm. Native American people have been treated as subhuman at the worst and as second-class citizens at the best during the 19th century.
True.
So many Native people left the United States for Canada and Mexico when the great cleansing came, the ethnic cleansing. Mm-hmm. You talk about what Hitler did to the Europeans.
Yeah.
Oh my God, what we did to the native cultures defies anything that you can even imagine. And I say we because I'm a white guy and I have to be responsible for it. We just submitted them to the worst indignities, and we threatened them with a Holocaust much greater than what happened to the Jews mm-hmm. and the Gypsies. And they were smart enough to get out of town, and a lot of them did it. So mm-hmm. there was a much higher population of Indian people up in Canada than there is in the United States to this day.
In a way, Ross, we're lucky that the information then is encoded in these monuments because it literally is encoded. I think one of the biggest areas of encoding information into ancient monuments is astronomy. And I think it's a growing, wonderful, beautiful subject of archaeoastronomy. It's blossomed, but, there's many other types of mathematical and geometry. And I think people are starting to look at that now and say, there's more geometries encoded into this stuff as well. Over my part of the world, I haven't released the information yet, but I'm publishing an article on henges, and I think there's a direct link with the same original source of knowledge to American monuments as same numerology, the same type of henges as there are in the Ohio Valley. It's England and Thornborough henges, Germany, there's henges in Ireland, and the henges have got very little press over here. And I know there's various henges in America, in the US. Now, Ross, the thing about Serpent Mound is it's an earthwork. It's in the shape of a serpent. It's incredibly graphically represented of a snake eating an egg, I think it is, and its tail is coiled. The most fascinating thing I came across in the book, obviously, was the alignment with the sun and the moon, the solstices, the maximums and the minimums. In terms of just laying out and any type of earthwork, regardless of the material, to do all that and have all the coils and the twists and the turns of the serpent, to take out, straight lines on the horizon, that's incredibly hard to do, Ross.
Yeah, it is incredibly hard to do. It's not something that we would have even thought of doing in our brief history, our European history. Mm. It wasn't until 1987, in fact, that we found out that the serpent, and this is embarrassing, but the serpent actually has a true north orientation between the tip of its tail and the apex of the hollow triangular feature in the head area, the eastern apex. And that was discovered by a friend of mine, Dr. William F. Romaine, who still works with us at the Serpent Mound site, trying to unravel its mysteries. When he made that discovery, I was able for the first time to begin to orient the serpent to my geometries properly. But we also found out that because it has that north orientation, which, by the way, compasses, of course, give incorrect readings at the site because there's gravitational, magnetic, electrical phenomena there that cause the compasses to be skewed by, I want to say, as much as 9 degrees. Wow. Some say 11, 12 degrees.
Wow.
And some say that you can actually see the compass hand move around. I've never seen that, but the serpent is really loaded.
Wow, with, that's incredible.
Subterranean phenomenon. So he made this sighting using basically the pole star, the current pole star, and showed where magnetic north is, although you can't tell it, using a regular compass. In any case, there's actually 3 great loops to the serpent, and when the loops are finished, it creates 7 coils. Mm. You could reverse that and say there's 3 loops and 7 coils, but or vice versa. And but what's fascinating is that the loops that go out to the east are the ones that receive, or you can see if you stand looking toward the east, the summer solstice equinox and winter solstice sunrises. And these are very accurate, even if you splay your time frame out for thousands of years in either direction. The coils of the serpent are sufficiently large to be able to take in those alignments. But at the same time, the 7 coils of the serpent, combined with the head, are able to display the maximum and minimum and central alignments in the prime phases of the lunar cycle, which, as some of you may know, extends over 2 9.3-year cycles.
Yeah, 18.6 in total, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And this is fascinating, too, because they line up in the same coils. So, there was some argument, because one group postulated the fact that the serpent was a lunar, perhaps an eclipse predictor, and the other faction of archaeologists said, no, it's solar, because it, And what I hypothesize in the mystery of the Serpent Mound is that, no, it's both, gentlemen, because I think that whoever constructed the serpent was more wishing to give the serpent a universal appeal and give it a sort of complete astronomical intelligence, or make it a repository for all astronomical and astrological information instead of, just specializing in this or that. But that wasn't met with a great deal of acceptance. So I have been able to get a few people interested in that idea. But subsequent discoveries kind of back that idea up, that the serpent, like the Glastonbury tour, may have been central to an ancient outlay of astronomical houses throughout the Ohio Valley. But unlike Glastonbury, which is perhaps 60 or 70 square miles of solitary figures, the serpent cosmography, if you will, separates each of its grouping of stars, each of its constellations, like castles over the landscape, and spreads out the cosmography over hundreds and hundreds of square miles.
How many mounds, Ross, how many mounds are we talking in the Ohio Valley?
I would say if you just include the non-burial, geometric, and animal effigies, and Manitou effigies, we may have had as many as 80, 90 of those.
Wow.
But when you include the burial mounds, there were over 10,000 of them.
Whoa.
And the burial mounds seem to have proceeded in lieu of the construction of these geometric and animal mounds. So there's a theory out there, very interesting theory, that the people that created the burial mounds for themselves were the same people that rehabilitated the traces of a previous culture that embodied these Pythagorean, Euclidean, and Archimedean concepts in their structures, and that these people saw to it that many of these monuments were precisely preserved in earth and stone in order to be able to trace their outlines in the hope that the gods would come back to them, showing this sort of reverence. And they made their sacred burial sites at times within these great squares and circles and octagons, at times outside of them. So that's food for thought.
Sure. Ross, did I see, I could be wrong, I'm trying to work from memory at the moment, is there another effigy mound of a frog? Or is it?
Well, there's a couple of theories on that too.
But there is other animal effigy mounds is my point anyway.
There are. Now, in the Mystery of the Serpent Mound, I really don't talk about that, but in Star Mound's Legacy, I show how there may be at least 7 or 8 other effigy mounds that are recognizably that. Although archaeologists only recognize 2, what they call the water panther and the serpent. But there are pretty obviously a great bear's head, a great giant boar, a possible beaver, and I mean the list goes on. But all of them were dedicated either to specific geometric principles or to abstract effigies, both anthropomorphic and animal. And so you'll see that all of them have some special character associated with them. And although we don't relate to them specifically as recognizable animal effigies or, man-like effigies, I think whoever constructed them did. And there's a lot more to it.
Sure. So, I'm guessing then, Serpent Mound is obviously the most pristine. It's the most preserved. It's like the spokesman now for all the rest of the mounds, effigy mounds. I'm guessing, it's well manicured and well protected, but the other effigy mounds, I'm guessing, are, off the beaten track, not very well researched.
Right. Because of ancient aliens and because a lot of people of like mind to myself have been emphasizing Serpent Mound, it's been getting more recognition than some of the other sites. But there are a couple, maybe 3 that I think are worth visiting if you come to the Ohio Valley.
And at them sites, Ross, is there anything abnormal there, like the earth energies or geological information, or?
Not like the Serpent Mound. The Serpent Mound is really quite something when it comes to that kind of phenomena. But Fort Ancient, for example, is incredibly large. It would take you the entire day just to make the effort to walk around it. It's a woodland, but it does receive a great number of lightning strikes, I'm told. And it appears to be the effigy to constellation Scorpius, a corral for holding in the constellation Scorpius.
Oh,
wow. There's also the world-famous phenomenon of the circle octagon, which is noted because of its remarkable lunar alignments falling into its geometric body, seeming to dictate the geometries themselves. And then there's the water panther itself, which is not that far from from the Newark Circle and Octagon. Now, the Circle and Octagon is just part of a large complex, which has, for the most part now, except for the Great Circle, been destroyed by interests of towns and cities and farming that came up. But I think those three are worth going to see. There are other properties that have been preserved. The Hopewell Mound Group, there's one that we recently were able to save, which is sacred to the constellation Capricornus. But all of their earthworks have been leveled or destroyed. Mm-hmm. And so we think that there's an effort about to recapture many of these ancient properties, just in case we come to a level of consciousness that wants to restore these antiquities at some point.
Mm. It must have been an incredible sight to see all these things finished in their day, Ross.
Yeah, boy, there's many of us that wish there were such a thing as a time machine.
Go back, it's in a way we're kind of peering into the past with limited knowledge, or in a tight little window, and we're trying to crack the code of what's in these sites. And there's certainly information encoded from astronomical to symbology and mathematics and geometry. I found some of the other mounds incredibly interesting. I mentioned the Octagon Mound, I think it was, and the numerology as well.
Yes, the one I was talking about that had the lunar. Mm. Yeah, that's the Octagon.
Octagon. Yeah, and the sheer quantity of these, Ross, we're talking a civilization, really, that built this, Ross.
Yeah, I had some theories about that in star mounds. In fact, my theories are so, I would say, esoteric. Mm. They involve, I'm an initiate philosopher by trade. And just because I've learned a lot about the etheric zone of the Earth and how it relates to the terrestrial zone of the Earth, mm-hmm. doesn't mean that everybody else understands it. So sure. I created a sort of, I reassembled a mythology that's based upon Native American stories, combined with the realigning of the star groups sacred to these sites, and in such a way, along with a glossary of terms of the principles and principals of the earthworks and what they once were, kind of temples, if you will, to the earth-sky premise of purifying the earth and keeping the earth in a higher state of resonance. That I think people will find very enjoyable. It sort of uses the technique that people like I don't want to compare myself to Tolkien, of course, but he uses the mythology, the mythological premise, to bring home something that probably actually happened a long time ago, but that he knew people wouldn't really accept if he just said, "Well, this is what really happened." And so, what I've done is try to present all this archaeological and astronomical information in the form that is palatable by combining it with Indian legend to show that Native people are actually the ancestors of a group of people that they descended from in a way that took away their enlightenment in the same way as the Europeans had their enlightenment taken away from them as they progressed more toward technological and material culture. So, Native people went through a sort of fall from grace in the same way as the rest of the world did. In fact, in some, the whole world kind of has gone through a loss of memory, which has taken us away from the beauty of these antique kind of golden age civilizations that enjoyed that higher mentality, where all of these arts and sciences were pretty much brought together as though they were one thing, which pulsed with life and light and made people, happy, not always warring with each other. Mm-hmm. And it brings in the concept of oneness and real love, compassion.
Sure. Ross, I often make comparisons to our modern civilization, and I say, we're not the smartest we've ever been. And when you look at what we do, yes, we have big giant telescopes and we point them up at the sky and we peer into the galaxy, but just very few people on this planet can use the high technology. Most people on the planet don't understand math. They don't understand the high technology, the high civilization. It's all run by computers. If the computer systems fail, the high technology fails. Most people have 7 billion people on the planet. There's a very small percentage of those can run the high technology systems. And in a way, I think we're failing in a way. However, when you look at ancient cultures, and I do anyway, and I look at what's encompassed in a bit of earth and mud, and it's got mathematics, geometry, astronomy. Some of the mounds in Europe have got acoustics as well, and the art that's, going back to 3000 BC, it's extremely indicative of acoustic waves. It's certainly got Rinus in Brittany. But I think that because they didn't have the trappings of a material civilization, they were able to encompass and put it into a super philosophy without the trappings of a material civilization. That's the way I like to think of it anyway, Ross. But
yeah, absolutely. An old friend of mine, Paul Devereaux.
Oh yes, Paul. I've spoken with Paul a couple of times. He's an awesome guy. Awesome guy.
Yeah, he visited us back in the 80s. I gave him a tour of the Ohio Mounds and so forth. And I think it was shortly after that he embarked into that sort of ancient resonance idea that he's been promulgating ever since on a world basis.
Sure.
Now, we're trying to get him back because at the Serpent Mound, we discovered what I call, and I show it on Ancient Aliens, the Serpent Mound stone, which looks astonishingly similar to a British menhir, or one of those tall stones that was cut, rectilinear, you might say, and at the top of it is a notch, and that is laying at the base of the cliff near the serpent's head, down about 80 feet. It slid down a very steep cliff. And we believe that either a late Indian tribe, native tribe, or one of the early farmers to the area may have plucked that stone, it's pretty heavy, out of the ground using a team of oxen with chains and threw it over the cliff because it may have been producing an irritating or annoying sound that didn't allow anybody to get very close to it. Now, there are places like this. There's one in Tennessee, the location of which I have to keep kind of private for now, although it was mentioned in Ripley's Believe It or Not many years ago. These sites, now the Iroquois knew about these places, but there are places on the Earth grid where if you place a certain kind of stone, especially a quartz-bearing stone, but you place another kind of stone that's not so receptive to current on top of it as a capstone, the quartz-bearing stone will draw up from the Earth its electrical forces. And, of course, being a gravitational anomaly helps to attract Earth energies. The greater the weight of a stone, the more likely it is to attract Earth energies, especially if it's located on a power node of the grid. And once that menhir, if you will, or stone, fills up with energy, which is what I think happened at Serpent Mound in the center of the oval, there's a power node, which I'll discuss in a second. The capstone on the top, when it meets that energy, can't accept it, and so it creates a short circuit, which translates as a rattling sound. And the ancients used to carve their capstones and stones to certain pitches to create either a sort of diapasonic expression or just a nasty kind of negative expression. Now, we found both in the United States. We found harmonious sounds, but we've also found sounds that are like violent giant bee hives buzzing. And these places were meant to keep people away Because when these ancient Manitous or effigy forms, and I think they were all over Great Britain, and they inherited this knowledge from Atlantis, I believe, were working properly. And when they were put into disuse, and of course the ancients had this wisdom to take away the technology, they would preserve their ancient sites by leaving a trace of their outline of their geometry there, but also they would leave these standing stones in place to make sure that they were still bringing the earth energy to that spot, so that when future generations were able to understand again what they were doing, they'd have the energy ready to go, and it could be used again. But we dumbbells, and I mean that especially in the case of American inheritors of the landscape, we dummies destroyed all of the standing stones and all the earthworks, everything that had to do with these ancient preservationists, what we call the Indians, to such a point where we can't understand. So I've made an effort. I've tried to be respectful, but our archaeologists, will not even consider looking at the stone to determine whether or not it is an artifact. They just laugh at my notion that that stone was once emplaced in the oval in order to keep things warm for when we get smart enough to reconvene the serpent effigy. And that's the kind of ignorance that we deal with, and it's all over the world. And that's why, in spite of the fact that ancient aliens kind of misinterpreted me.
Sure.
Toward, achieving what they wanted to achieve to increase their audience. At the same time, I was really grateful to them because they created that video.
Bring attention.
Of the stone in the center of the,
Sure.
You follow what I mean?
Yeah, no, I watched the episode. I know exactly what you're talking about. Ancient Aliens. That's like I say to everybody. I've got another show, Ancient Aliens, for the cast. I do stuff like that, and 70% truth, 30% embellishment, enhancement to get the numbers up.
Exactly.
But, that's TV. It's popular TV. It's like a very, very popular program. Robert Boval's on the show a few times as well. Robert's on Ancient Aliens.
Yeah.
And, that's fine. I mean, I understand they got to sell the program to and they want to whet the public's attention and whet their appetite. And, but yeah, you're most likely right that's, I think there's a lot more to Serpent Mound that meets the eye, Ross. There certainly is. There's another couple of anomalies I'm aware of. There's strange plants growing there and animals nearby.
Isn't that funny you should say that? Yes, there's been, some species of plants that are indigenous to that particular area seem to grow faster and larger there. And I talked to a botanist and a naturalist, a couple of them. And and there are certain species of animals that show up at Serpent Mound that are not like others of their kind. And nobody really understands that, but the energies there seem to either affect the seeds or the eggs of things and give them a different tenor. They bring out some perhaps vestigial aspects of their genetic code because of the electricities associated with parts of it.
How strange it is that we have a snake and an egg as the effigy then.
I had a friend of mine, a woman, was giving a class there, and she had, they were tarrying, if you will, on one of the slopes of the Serpent. And suddenly a hot pink, something approaching a hot pink frog appeared.
Wow.
And it was just like mind. It was all consuming with the attention, She had to stop her talk. This little hot pink frog appeared.
Wow.
And then there's a couple of species of plants that grow on the side of the Serpent Mound feature that grow larger than anywhere else in Ohio.
Wow, really?
And of course, we discourage people taking samples of any of the flora, fauna, or minerals because if everybody did it, pretty soon.
One rule for all, as they say. Ross, there's caves there as well, I believe. Is that right?
Yeah, here's an interesting story for you, James.
Sure.
Legend has it, local legend has it that And as you know, when you live in an area and you sleep there, you get married there, you're born, die there, you tend to know what's going on underground. It just sort of filters through the subconscious and becomes part of folk tradition. And the folk tradition of Native people, as well as, let's call them indigenous white folk, all believe that there is a vast and complicated cave structure underscoring that area. And in fact, some friends of mine who live on about a quarter mile from the Serpent on a street called Horner Chapel Road say that there are moments, and they've witnessed this, when the lightning strikes, you hear the thunder underground.
Underground, really?
Underground. Wow. Which means that, you know how lightning works. When it leaves, the air molecules rush back and create the thunderclap. Well, the lightning just goes right into the underworld and obviously into a cave structure.
Rumbles in the caves. Resonates in the caves,
yeah.
That's incredible, Ross.
But we believe, and this is, of course, just a theory, but we believe that those cave entrances were thoroughly, and I mean efficiently, blocked off by the old people in order to conceal what is in there.
Wow.
And I believe also that Glastonbury was thoroughly camouflaged to conceal what the tour has in its storage cavity.
Sure. I wonder, is there a radiation affecting the flora and fauna, Ross? That seems like the most logical thing.
Yeah, there was a scientific study that was done in the middle 90s by a couple of men named Burke and Halberg. And you can get their book. It's kind of expensive because it's been out of print. Mm-hmm. But it's called Seed of Knowledge, Stone of Plenty.
Yeah.
And that study they did, we've been able to repeat several times. And in fact, it engendered a Serpent Mound Seed Festival every year, our second annual we had this year. And what it is that if you take little cloth bags, or just leave them in jars if you want, but preferably little cloth bags, or leave them open, and lay your seeds on the serpent's coils for a few minutes or a few hours, and very carefully take them. They apparently work better if you wait, like do it in the fall and wait till spring. But I think you can plant them within a few weeks. The radiation of the serpent seems to, in some way, and we use the word damage, but it sort of constructs the DNA or the I don't know, the very vital force of the seed.
For higher yield.
Yeah, to realign it so that it grows up to 5 times faster, has 5 times greater disease resistance, and also has a greater hatch rate. So more of them actually hatch out from their seeds.
How fascinating. Yeah, I think John Burke had gone around a lot of different pyramids around the world, Avebury as well, I think, and had, took this idea that you're talking about, and I think it was at dawn, when the sun's coming back and the magnetic field changes and stuff like that. But he said there was pyramids that were active and pyramids that weren't active. Incredibly interesting work, Ross, that. I guess, just on some of the anomalies, I mean, you mentioned Devereux as well, Paul Devereux, and he wrote a lot about earth lights. I spoke a couple of times, had some correspondence with him. Incredibly fascinating guy. Earth lights and lightning, I mean, it's bizarre. Do we have any reason why there's a lot of lightning there, Ross, or why these earth lights are appearing?
Yeah, earth lights, there are. There seems to be a point near the surface of the earth. And, I learned about earth lights from Paul. It's funny. When I was giving him a tour around, I told him about an experience I had. And he said, that's probably an earth light. It was it was like in a low-lying area of an active stream bed, early in the morning in summer, especially in spring. The energies of the Earth will seem to find a nexus point with the atmospheric energies and form by some sort of gravity these luminous, shapeless forms that will at times become more geometric and concentrated. But at Serpent Mound, from time to time, you'll hear someone had an experience of seeing a human being or an animal shape that takes a spirit form. So that it's been thought that the ancient shaman class, the medicine class, were able to use those energies, especially at certain times of the year or under certain specific weather conditions, like fog, to be able to use just their thought to be able to mold those sensitive energies into forms that they used in their magic. But those shapeless masses of earthlights, they accumulate just on their own. It's what those trained magicians did with those energies that is of interest. Now, the Manitous, which were temple-like structures, could have been all around Glastonbury at one time, or any one of other sites, were, I think, especially formulated geometrically to train those energies in order to utilize them. In other words, those energies toward their arts and sciences. And Michel says the same thing. He said that the Acropolis may have housed architectures like, what's there right now to effect a sort of, now he didn't say this, but I would say a sort of like a bioluminescence, making those temple structures, those beautiful sculptings, resonant with the astral world. The same kind of phenomena that happens when you pile stones up on each other, create those dolmens. A person with sensitive vision notes that there's an electrical current generated, and if you can see that electrical current by sitting really still, by laying inside of the dolmen, looking up at the ceiling, pretty soon you can see into what we call the fairy world, this sensitive, sort of self-luminescent plane that precedes the true astral plane.
Wow.
That's their science, science of contemplative mysticism.
Ross, let's have a double question here now. I'll explain what I'm talking about. Is there anything rigid in the carbon dating, or is there flaws in the carbon dating? I personally think this site's a lot older. Maybe it's like most ancient sites around the world. There's always built in something earlier. And is there any archaeoastronomy dating with constellations or star alignments?
Yeah, there's both. We have carbon that's been retrieved from Serpent Mound that goes from practically 1,000 years BC up to 1,000 years CE, BCE, CE. And so there's controversy among groups who retrieve that carbon. And of course, you have to have a license to do that kind of work. But to offset those, extreme dating horizons for the possible Serpent's construction, there is a star date for the design, which is different from the construction in this case of the Serpent, that goes back to 3000 BCE. With the possibility of it going back much further. But we have a very specific date, star date of 3000 BCE, because the pole star corresponds to the Indian legend of the heart of the serpent being beneath the seventh coil, which is where, when you place the constellation Draconis over it, the ancient pole star, Draconis Alpha, sits. So that happens to be the geographic center of the serpent as well. So when you rotate the serpent around that pole star, it makes a perfect circle, which we call the circle of Draconis Alpha, or the circle of Tubin. And that very specifically dates the design of the serpent to 3000 BCE. Now, that's when I think the serpent was laid to rest. That's when I think Apollo slew the python and converted its body into many parts, which is really a subject for another discussion. But there are mythological connections to our serpent that give it a world-class sort of personality.
We'll take a quick 2-minute break, Ross, and we're going to be back in just a moment.
All right.
Hi, everybody, and you're welcome back. And I'm talking to Mr. Ross Hamilton, author of The Mystery of the Serpent Mound, In Search of the Alphabet of the Gods. And what a fascinating book, what a fascinating discussion we're having on Serpent Mound. Ross is by far, for me, one of the most prolific researchers of Serpent Mound. Many books on the subject, but I think what Ross' books encompasses is a lot of alchemical, esoteric, archaeoastronomy data, geological data. It's all in the one place, and get yourself a copy. It's a timeless piece. Of course, welcome back to the show, Ross.
Yeah, thank you, James.
You are
it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and so you are the author of more recent books than this one. I don't normally do an old book, but I think it is a timeless book, Ross. It's been quite successful, I think, and you have other books recently. If you want to give them a little mention, Ross.
Yeah, there's a book called Star Mounds: Legacy of a Native American Mystery that can be picked up on Amazon, and it deals with the Serpent Mound as sort of an advanced idea that the serpent was the center of an ancient cosmographical outlay of lodges, each of which was covering a certain segment of the night sky. Mm-hmm. So the constellations of the ancients are examined in detail, and some of them are well, you'll have to see if you. And then I have several books that are privately published, but you can purchase them if you wish through the Ancient American Bookstore online, and just signify if you want me to sign them or not. Mm-hmm. And they include A Tradition of Giants, which is a study that I did with Native American leader Vine Deloria Jr. and Iroquois chieftain Jake Swamp back in the latter part of the 90s and the early part of this century, having to do with the discovery of extraordinarily tall human remains within the earthworks of the Ohio Valley and other parts of the United States, mm-hmm. and how we were able to trace the origins and the movements of the tall ones. We don't like to call them giants because that gets mixed up with aliens and DNA manipulation and things like that. Yeah. But these are actual accounts, and we have actually hundreds of them, postulating the existence of a hierarchical race of very tall men and women that served as chieftains and protectors and medicine staff, if you will, of our ancient native societies. And
so
there's 3 publications.
I'm glad you mentioned the giants, Ross. We're attributing these, sorry, I shouldn't say giants, the tall ones, Ross. Sorry, I'm being educated there.
Oh, that's all right.
Yeah, no, but you're right in what you say. There is like Anunnaki giants, there's Nephilim, there's like all sorts of names thrown about now, and it's popular and fashionable to talk about these names. But yeah, so the tall ones are the race or civilization that built these monuments, Ross.
I believe so. I think they were intimately involved in both the design and the construction of the monuments of the Ohio Valley. Mm-hmm. What's interesting about this is that how Stonehenge in Great Britain mm-hmm. Was the site where many of the gentry of the ancient days liked to come to have themselves interred. Mm-hmm. So the Serpent Mound seems to have been a similar site where the ancient class of the elite seem to have wanted to come to the area of Serpent Mound to have themselves interred as well. There's a great deal of evidence that all of the earthwork structures were very similarly visited over many generations, so that there are intrusive burials in some of the mounds that come up to the later periods of the woodland cultures, even though the mounds may have originally been of the oldest the mortuary earthwork constructs. So I don't know if I digress from the point there, but
not so much. I kind of, there's a lot of mythological lore about giants and building dolmens and mounds of Europe, Britain, Ireland, Spain, France, all that. And funny enough, it's the time frame of 3000 BC. This side of the water, Ross, ties in nicely with the 3000 BC your side, and I have no doubt there was a culture, if you want to call it at the minimum, a culture going across the globe and setting up places. We see the same architecture, Ross, your side of the Atlantic as mine. It's the same, and I'm going to get into this now in a minute, the numerology of 666, but we see the same style of architecture, the same numbers and geometries coming up in them. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out there might be some sort of commonality.
Your work is fascinating too, James. I mean, I'm just starting to penetrate some of what I'm thinking at first, I wonder if this guy is just an amateur. It turns out you really apparently have been doing this for a long time, so I'm fascinated by your work. Mm. Well, and, I tried to carry some of that spirit that you have, that kind of understanding of a very ancient university that perhaps left its seeds in various cultures all over the planet, but that in our subsequent sort of devolution of the human race, we became separated both by continent, by race, mm-hmm. and now by politics. And so it's very difficult to piece this together except through the mathematics and geometry. So a wise man it is, mm-hmm. James, to apply these principles to show the commonality of sites. Mm. Now, in the Ohio Valley, I've been able to show classical Pythagorean relationships with not just the serpent, but other of the earthwork structures. Mm-hmm. But not just Pythagorean, but also, and I'm very fond of saying this, Euclidean, because Euclid was the first great bringing together of a great compendium author of many of these. Even though he lived after the time of Pythagoras, he brought together much of what Plato and Pythagoras had been using, and probably many others that we don't know about. And so there's a lot of that Euclidean arithmetic and mathematics and geometry. But again, there's that classic Pythagorean stuff. But there's also Archimedean geometrics and mathematics and Archimedean ideas, which seem to take much of Greek thought in that time, because Archimedes was, of course, 2nd century antemillennium. And by that time, these guys were really getting sharp. And they were taking that energy of the ancients, and they were finely compressing it and attuning it to spawn that fabulous genius that set into motion much of Western civilization as we think of it today. Archimedes, of course, sadly died at the hands of a Roman soldier. I think it was an inadvertent thing. But at the same time, these kinds of tragedies seem to fall upon all the old masters. And there seems to be a pattern of when these knowledges come into comprehension and when they're placed into these ancient structures for the specific purpose of preserving them, someone, I want to say jackass, comes along and destroys them. And we have to deal with this kind of mentality and fight against it. And the best way to fight against it is just to turn the other cheek and rebuild, reassert, and remind people they knew back then what we're only now coming to recognize as smart and brilliant today again. And that we should kind of make ourselves more receptive and be a little bit more humble and don't destroy the libraries and stop digging up the graves. Have you ever noticed that, James?
Totally. I actually see there's a blindness out there, and that's why I kind of wanted to understand the American present day acceptance of these monuments, Ross, because we have the same over here. Granted, a lot of the stuff has survived. Where I'm at in Ireland, Newgrange, you know, it was sealed until like the 17th century because the doorway was just basically blocked. And so it has been open for 300 years. It's probably been robbed of a few items, but pretty much we have a lot of stuff still pristine. But we do also have farmers that have just literally just ripped the stuff apart and used it to make walls. And I can only think what was there in the start. I mean, like you say, I've been a hardened researcher. I've gone to something like 400 mounds across Europe. I was in a good position to do that from work and location. It was always a hobby, but the hobby became serious, and in the end, I ended up writing a book on it, as you say. But you know, I don't see other people that has the appreciation that I have, Ross, and certainly not in archaeology. The people that should be so enthusiastic looking into these, monuments from all angles. But you usually find they want to concentrate on the stones and the bones, and that's it. They don't touch astronomy. And it's incredible that 90% of the monuments before 1500 BC, Ross, have astronomical alignments, and they don't bring astronomers in to look at them. I know that just makes me insanely crazy.
It's like we're relearning everything. And so what happens if one of these doomsday scenarios comes over us? We get taken over by, some corporate mentality, and all the libraries and all of the software and all of the computers are somehow replaced by what they want. Mm-hmm. And we lose everything we've done now. Mm-hmm. Anything could happen. So here's the thing. In the mystery of the Serpent Mound, mm-hmm. I hypothesize that the serpent is actually a very clever sort of encapsulated time, a time repository of a massive figure on the landscape that we term the phoenix. I don't know if you've gotten to the back of the book yet or not. But,
sure.
The serpent serves as the perennial worm of the phoenix, and that once every 7,000 years, the worm transforms into the new phoenix, which rises upon the landscape, kind of paralyzes the entire world with the truth for a period of not more than 1,000 years. And this is a mechanism that was set into place because the race of man who inhabits this planet, this sphere, has a tendency to fall back into a very primitive, kind of selfish mode unless he is reminded from time to time by some saint or some philosopher or some great teacher or a phenomenon that occurs almost mechanically that he is a god and not a mortal human being in the truthful essence of it. So we see, from India over the last 50 years, we've seen this sudden, just amazing migration and sort of attack or onslaught of holy men and women coming out and seating themselves all over the world, teaching self-realization, God-realization. You must light the lamp within you so you begin to see the truth, because there's something about to happen that's going to put an end to civilization as we know it. Mm-hmm. And, of course, I don't like to be, a purveyor of doom and gloom, but we've all heard the prophecies that the world is changing, and 2012 may have been the ground zero for the enactment of a new precessionary period, wherein, at the onset of which, we're going to see the world fall into utter darkness in the first 18 years or so. Now, this is all part of the mathematics and so forth. And it is a sketchy prophecy. But there's this figure that exists beneath the landscape that is yet extant in the astral aspect of the planet Earth. Mm-hmm. And of course, the Earth is believed by the masters and those who are the initiates and so forth. Those of us who call us the New Age people, the sensitive people, the people that go to Stonehenge and celebrate, the solstice next weekend.
Sure.
Those people, the people that have that modicum of enlightenment, that know there's something more going on, but are humble enough not to want to try to force their opinion on the status quo.
Sure.
And there's that understanding is coming back, that this phoenix, this figure of the phoenix, rises up once every 7,000 years, and it lasts for 1,000 years. And when it fades out, it leaves the mark of its culture on all of the indigenous people of the planet. And they all cultivate it, but it gradually sort of falls out of comprehension, except in, India, which is the only place that really has preserved the light, over the next 5,000 years, but especially beginning 2,000 years after the initial rise, about 5,000 years ago, about 3,000 BC, we began to fall earnestly into darkness.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So the prophecy goes like this. It holds to the Greek myth that there's this great winged archangelic figure that we liken to, the Egyptians liken to a winged man or a winged goddess figure that comes from its highest abode in the highest possible reach or region of the cosmos, of the earth, in the causal region of the earth, where the earth is more like a crystal sphere where the angels live. And it comes down to the terrestrial sphere of the earth, and it builds a mighty nest, a nest made of the most important special schools, colleges, and universities of thought that the ancients called herbs and spices of our intelligence. And once this nest is created, and Manly Hall likened the nest of the phoenix to be made of acacia, the same wood that the Ark of the Covenant is made of. So, just as an aside, I believe that the Ark will be used to revive this culture. Mm-hmm. And not, anybody can make one when the time comes, but that's another story.
Sure.
And that,
sorry, Ross, just in terms of rock art, is there any rock art at the place, primitive or simple or complex?
Yeah, the serpent itself is a piece of rock art because it has a skeletal structure of itself beneath the earth. Wow. So, but as far as rock carvings are concerned.
Rock carvings, yeah.
No, there's nothing there. It's pretty much a blank canvas. Now, in the area surrounding, there are some primitive rock art that has been found, that was left there by native people. It appears to be star patterns in nature.
Wow, interesting.
But there's nothing to suggest that a higher culture lived here, except the serpent, itself.
Of course, Ross, you've been at the monument for a long time, working there. I know you've had, you're a very spiritual guy as well, and into meditation and focusing your energy. But have you ever had any personal experiences there in terms of meditation at the place, or?
Yeah, I had a vision of the serpent when I first was able to see an accurate map of the Serpent Mound. I saw what it actually looked like, and having visited there, I knew what it felt like. I was used to meditating because I was initiated by an Indian saint back in 1969, and I had a vision one morning, and visions usually come from long periods of focus. Visions and other phenomenon, spiritual phenomenon happen. Sometimes they're external, like you hear about miracles happening around saints. And this is because they keep an internal focus. And Indian medicine men, they focus, and that's how they produce their miracles. Well, I had been focusing for a number of years, and it suddenly just exploded out. And in India, they call it samadhi. And what I saw was the serpent exploding into a huge figure that covered the landscape, way up from the Hudson Bay all the way down to the Gulf. And it was a figure in the shape of a phoenix, a great thunderbird, and it had 7 powerful medicine wheels. And then as my vision faded, I could see how, as the enlightened feature of the earth, how this feature of the great phoenix dimmed itself, that the terrestrial body of the earth grew over it and created a system of caves and created forestscapes and waterways and other natural occurrences that seemed to hold that original shape, but were gradually losing the light that was fading from that manifestation of the phoenix. And it was just a wonderful vision, but I didn't have a clue on what it meant until I realized that the 7 powerful chakrams that I saw manufacturing this wonderful earth-sky energy, giving life to this wonderful cross-legged, meditative figure with the 2 wings that went up around the Hudson Bay and another set of wings that went up to New England and the Dakotas, and then the body like a headdress that went all through the eastern United States and parts of the old western United States. It wasn't until I saw that there were 7 earthly cities situated over those same spots that I marveled. Like Tallahassee was over the base chakra, Atlanta was over the next chakra, and then another chakra over a sacred spot with an important city near it in Tennessee, and then the heart chakra, where in Lexington, where the Queen goes to buy her horses at times, and then Cincinnati for the throat chakra, and then the eye chakra was in the state of Michigan, Lansing, Michigan, and then the crown chakra was Sault Ste. Marie. And then, this is the strangest thing, I saw like a light coming from Great Britain. And I saw all this in reverse. Everything was reversing itself. And, as this vision faded, I saw a light coming from Great Britain, like in an arc, and going to Serpent Mound.
Wow.
And the light did something to the serpent that gave it a glow again. And something said to me, the nest of the phoenix are all the lodges of the Ohio Valley. And the phoenix worm itself is the Serpent Mound. And then my skin started to crawl, and I realized that someone from Great Britain is going to initiate the bringing of the light that will spontaneously help to reaffirm that the serpent is the worm of the phoenix. Now, Indian legend concurs that not only is the heart of the serpent at the death of the last phoenix, 3000 BC, because the pole star is located at the geographic center of Serpent Mound, but also that there is this understanding that time is a sort of I've lost my train of thought, but not only do we go back in time, but we can go ahead in time and recognize that if 2012, and I say this in a theory, is the beginning of the new phoenix, of the rising of the new phoenix, then we will see someone coming from your neck of the woods over here to help us. And you know what? Something funny happened. There's a fella named Tor, who came over here, and he's a friend of Hugh's. He's a friend of mine now.
Sure.
His name is Tor Webster, and he was doing a movie, and he's a kid, and he came over here with some big crystals, and he was doing research on serpents all over the world.
Wow.
He's from Glastonbury.
Wow.
His name is Tor Webster. And he put a crystal down in the middle of the Serpent Mound oval, and he walked away, and he left his camera there, and he had a pretty good quality camera. There's nothing wrong with it. And he sort of photographed him at his feet walking away. And he posted this on YouTube, but he didn't realize it until after he posted it. But that crystal was putting off a sound as long as his microphone was pointing toward it, and as long as it was over the power node at the center of the serpent's oval. And then I thought, I wonder if Tor is that guy that was sent from Glastonbury to begin to revive the Serpent Mound.
Wow.
And that video is posted on YouTube under Serpent Mound sound.
Wow.
It sounds like, just some sort of mechanical thing. But we found another serpent site in Georgia, where that same issue comes forth. A sort of recording from the Earth grid if you put crystal there.
Wow.
Because quartz seems to resonate.
Sure.
I know it's a little bit, a little bit esoteric, but I had that vision. And all these things have happened since then. And I personally believe that the Serpent Mound is the worm of the phoenix, and that because of something that happens in England and is brought here, that eventually the Serpent Mound is recognized as a harbinger of all knowledge, all astronomical knowledge, all earth energy knowledge, all knowledge of alchemy, and all knowledge of, the golden age principles of the configuration of the atmosphere and the earth, and will again rise up, and that phoenix will, like high Brazil, comes out of the ocean at some time, an invisible sense, and how Avalon will appear again. And this will happen, and there's nothing that we can do about it. And it may happen very soon, people.
Ross, for me, these are esoteric monuments, because I look at them in detail and I look at them in depth, and I look, that's what I loved about your book the most, Ross, was that it is an in-depth analysis from all bodies of knowledge. And I'm glad you mentioned the story with the Thor there, because just before the show I was asked a question, why my interest in serpent mythology, you mentioned that this guy was looking at stuff on a global scale all around the world, and that's what interests me, Ross, is that all around the world there's a serpent mythology, history, artifacts. I think the monument of Serpent Mound is incredibly up there on the interesting scale of a serpent artifact to look at. However, it's in all our mythologies all around the world. There seems to be some sort of a commonality where people are talking about serpent knowledge, serpent wisdom. The serpent is deified, or the knowledge that's given is always done by a serpent of some class. And I just want to know why, first and foremost, in a scientific way, why is all these different cultures all around the world got the same idea, same philosophy, same knowledge? And then, that kind of tells me, well, is there a spiritual aspect to that? Is there serpents? Are there serpents on another plane? Is this a tangible thing, or is this a philosophy that's embodied with knowledge? It's an incredibly fascinating piece of research for me, and so I have that also interest in the Serpent Mound, and I also have the interest in the astronomy too. And it was just nice, Ross, to see it all in the one body of work and see it so well researched.
Oh, that's very kind of you. You know what I'm thinking? Excuse me. I'm thinking that a lot of why we don't comprehend this phenomenon of a thoroughly enriched world culture, a golden age type culture, is because the atmosphere of the earth has been depleted. Mm-hmm. I mean, utterly depleted of something we call the etheric condition. Mm-hmm. Now, let me just explain to you in layman's terms what the etheric condition means. In the esoteric wisdom, a lot of beginning students will study the earth, air, fire, and water, and ether. Mm-hmm. But very few people understand that that tradition exists in spiritual science as well. But instead of earth, it's the solid condition of matter. Instead of fire, it's the, metabolism, the fiery condition of matter, or, the flame itself. Instead of water, it's the liquid condition. And instead of air, we call it the gaseous condition. Mm-hmm. But the ether condition remains the same. Now, the ether is what is missing from our terrestrial earth, because as an old teacher of mine, George Arnsby Jones, once was very careful to explain, we in the physical world are basically at the bottom of an ocean of a creation of worlds that are all more highly evolved, and all are closer to the love of the Creator than we are. And they say it's a good fortune to be embodied in the human form on the earth, because here we can suffer the trials that many of the angels never get to suffer through, and therefore acquire a certain experience that adds to our angelic natures that people that don't come this far down never can acquire. And so the lacking of the etheric element in our atmosphere really is the whole issue of why we fall into such stark ignorance. First of all, when the ether is enriching conditions of matter that are solid, liquid, gaseous, and fiery, then we have an improved version, if you will, of those things. For example, if are you familiar with Findhorn Garden?
Findhorn Garden.
Findhorn Garden's in Scotland, and it was put together by some philosophical minded people a long time ago, and they were able to enrich the quality of the etheric in their garden area, and because of that, they were able to grow things right out of the sand of extraordinary size and health, melons and things like that. And I'm sure you've heard the stories about how when the capstone was on the Great Pyramid, that, as Herodotus reports to us, the people say that they were able to grow corn right out of the sand, and the whole region was a fertile region. But once the capstone is removed from the pyramid, or in the United States, or in old America, once the towers had their spikes removed, or the jewels were removed from their Manitou altars, this interaction between the energies of the sky and the energies of the earth was curtailed. So when the capstone was removed from the Great Pyramid, that was when the etheric condition began to recede, and we began to fall into a state of darkness. Now, if we get smart again, and we have to have it shown to us how to do it, and it has to be done by a karmic reaction from the past in order that some current power on the earth doesn't thwart it from happening. When we observe this phenomenon happening, and many of us will actually consciously participate in this phenomenon when it happens, we will see such an outpouring of the etheric essence that it will fill up every particle of every atom. Now, the reason it doesn't come through now, the reason we have to artificially produce it, is because we're at such a low level in the ocean of God's creation, the Creator's creation, that we're under great pressure. The atoms of and the molecules of our workshop here, of our earth, are so tightly compressed that the ether can't sing through. And so we get a bare sort of seepage of the ether. It comes out when plants grow in the spring. Now, Rudolf Steiner drew attention to this. So there's a great release of the etheric life energy in the spring. And this produces a lot of oxygen for us, and that oxygen quickly goes all over the planet. I think the planet increases its oxygen content by something between 7 and 18% when the northern hemisphere goes through spring.
Wow.
Now, the ether, the creation of the ether is backing that up. But like the Michelson-Morley experiment, we still can't measure the ether per se. It just brings life to things. So when the ancients artificially produced it, and Madame Blavatsky talks about it in her Secret Doctrine, I believe. She said that on Atlantis they had pyramids and capstones on everything they could lay their hands on. And they powered all of their temples with the magic box, what we call the Ark of the Covenant. And they, using that box, they were able to draw the energies out of the magnetic field of the Earth so that the Earth didn't accumulate too much heat beneath the crust.
Yeah.
Now,
like a release system, almost like a release system, Ross.
Right.
Wow.
So the ether comes through when we stir up things. I remember my master used to say, when you put food in your mouth or liquid, mush it up in your mouth and chew your food, and that releases the etheric, and that embeds itself in your food and brings out the flavor, what we call ras in India. Mm-hmm. And by the same token, any moving body of water, as it runs through the landscape, is always stirring up the etheric, and therefore things grow better around bodies of water. In fact, water was the element that was created specifically to be receptive to the ether. You see, it wasn't vice versa. It isn't the fact that, things grow better, Ross, because they're near water. No, it's because water is the most receptive element, or I should say molecule, to the ether. And that's why it has such amazing properties. It's magical. Wow. And we're mostly composed of water. So it's the ether, James. It's the etheric element that's missing, and why we'll be beating our head against the walls, unless we stir things up. Mm-hmm. Now, if we elect to aid the phoenix rising when it comes, we'll be able to sustain the golden age for more than 1,000 years. And I think the clock is ticking already. We're going to see, starting from 2012, we're going to lapse into a period of political and economic crisis, which is really, I mean, a lot of us are aware that it's coming upon us. Yeah. But during that time, we little people who are like fireflies in the night, we're all going to start having conventions, and we're going to start using our internet radio stations like you have. Mm-hmm. We may even develop an etheric radio that only we can tune into. Who knows what we'll be able to do as we become smarter and smarter. And as the phoenix begins to rise, and as Avalon begins to become more visible to our eyes, and as many of the things that have been lost to us, the good things that we've been missing, secret abilities to make seeds grow faster, and the ability to separate ourselves from the city dwellers and form communities that really work because we're over naturally occurring power centers, and we know how to tap into that energy. Mm-hmm. And, these things, as we cooperate more and more, we will have our life expectancies increased to not just 100 years, which we barely are able to make now, but people being born now, like the indigo children, and some people who are really tuned in that are in their 50s and 60s now. Even some of those people will live to be 200-300 years old in this time, because the ether is being stirred up everywhere, because the earthquakes are increasing and the phoenix is rising. Mother Earth is saying to us, I'm going to send my messenger. And that messenger, according to tradition, comes once every 2,500 years. And the last manifestation was Maitreya, the great Buddha, who lives to this day in the hearts and minds of all of us. About 25 years before Buddha, there was, a great Christ figure appeared. And the fact that Christ appeared, is just a manifestation of what happened in India 500 years before, and took the knowledge of the great Buddha and fashioned it into who we call Jesus Christ, which is a numerical phrase, Jesus Christos, which I outline in the Bible, which has a specific numerical value. And that is part of the message of Serpent Mound, and how the serpent is actually the serpent of Eden, and how Apollo slew that serpent when the pole star was turning away into the region of the current pole star. In the same way that Mithras slew the bull of Taurus because we were moving into Aries. So Apollo slew the python and chopped its body, the logos, all knowledge, the worm of the phoenix, into many parts, and stored it in the form of the Greek language. And that form is the Serpent Mound's form. And that phoenix will rise. That serpent is now, as we speak, beginning to gather more and more psychic power to it as more and more people realize that the earth is in its final and last stage of warning to the powers of darkness. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And if you think that isn't true, wait until he comes and brings it home. Now, there are some holy men in India who say that when it comes, 80% of the world's population will perish. And, of course, Mary Summerrain, in her book Phoenix Rising, took from native tradition an old holy woman who said the same thing. When the phoenix rises, hundreds of thousands of people will perish because they don't believe in the Earth Mother and the true light of the human heart, which is connected to the very soul of God. They believe in money, and they believe in the power that comes with spoiled politicians.
Yeah, Ross, to finish on that, there is more to life than money and materialism. And I have to say, in my 20s, I fell prey to some sort of not fully 100% to a material life. And I woke up basically in my late 20s. I feel privileged that I did. I can be forgiven for it is the trappings of our society in the Western world where we live. However, there is more to life than money. And I just wish that people could embrace this, knowledge that's on our fingertips now, Ross. Like I say, we have shows like this, we have the internet to share knowledge now. The knowledge is at our fingertips, whereas it wasn't before. And a finishing note, I mean, the thing I love about Serpent Mound is that it's still teaching us, Ross. It's teaching you, admittedly, still today, and me. And
in any case, the serpent is the one thing that can link us to all of our religious roots. And I don't say that without having studied this for many, many years. It can also link us with all of our most heartfelt roots of technological wealth and experience. It can link us with all the stars by simply reactivating the etheric element, and which is what the serpent is designed to do when it's working full tilt. And by creating a template like it that symbolically holds all the knowledge of the ancient schools of thought, we can literally revive the reality of an astral environment on our planet. And beyond that, truly a spiritual world where everybody actually does get along. But what's interesting about the Serpent Mound is that it's a phenomenon that's calculated to rise up into a greater form for 1,000 years. And then it is diminished again into a small worm. And every time this happens, and it happens over a long cycle of, sometimes some people think as much as 7,000 years. But when the cycle is done, and the phoenix is sort of decommissioned, and it returns back into a serpent, a great monument is made. But then the powers of darkness come over the phoenix and over the serpent and try to destroy it. Like in the Bible, you see that the book of Revelation is interpolated by the priestcraft, because it was written by probably Apollonius, or one of the great scholars of the time. But it was interpolated to say that the serpent, that is really an evil thing. And it wasn't until we really got a hold of the understanding of the Native American meaning of the serpent and the Central American Native American meaning that we understood that the serpent was really a sign of life and giving and expansion of awareness to all life and giving. And that to the ancients, because of its mercurial form and its mercurial nature, it was designated as a symbol for that which cannot be made into a symbol. The logos, the word, the creative power of the universe. And in its mouth is the universe itself, which the Maya call the Ket, or the cipher 0, by which they created the base 10 system. And so, we have this symbolism spread all over the world at one time. The Egyptians took part of it, the Maya, the Aztecs took part of it, the Greeks took part of it, and even the Australians have a great serpent that was the mother of all things. So, when I talk about the serpent as a symbol that unites all the religions, I can cite you how it unites each and every religion specifically, if I was given enough time, just through the influence of the Logos itself. So that when Apollo slew it to keep it preserved so it wouldn't be ruined, he chopped its body up into 24 parts that became the language that the New Testament was written in. And all of the old Greek scholarship was utilized. And that Greek alphabet is still used today, and it still has its numeric, values each letter does. Mm-hmm. And as you see how I put each letter of the Greek alphabet together and how it forms the image of the Serpent Mound, you come to understand what my mission is, and that is not to say to people, wake up. Maybe it is to some of us who are here to witness this phenomenon, the Phoenix Rising. But it's really here to say, watch out, because this is happening. I'm not the one that's going to force it to happen, but there is a massive outpouring of light that's going to affect every man, woman, child, animal, and thing on the earth. And none of us are going to escape it. So you might as well put yourself into a position of receptivity where you don't get burned off by it. Mm-hmm. Nothing can stop what's about to happen.
Wow. Okay, Ross, we're at the end of the show. Just wanted to mention on Facebook you can join the Friends of Serpent Mound Facebook group. It looks really interesting. Of course, greatserpentmound.org is another great site on the internet if everybody wants extra information. Are you still doing Ancient Aliens today, Ross? Are you doing any speaking conferences?
From time to time, I'll accept a speaking engagement. I do want to add one thing. I want to thank Hugh Newman.
Oh, yes. Good.
A personal friend of mine, for being so instrumental in helping to get a lot of this that I'm sort of preaching on the road. Mm-hmm. Hugh is, of course, a world-class, I guess you would say, teacher, and he's drawing attention to a lot of the sites, so I want to just put that out there. My next speaking engagement is going to be at the Serpent Mound at summer solstice. So we welcome anyone who's coming to join us with a group of other speakers. And, you'll have the time of your life. We can show you how magnetic compasses give incorrect readings and lots of other stuff. And there's plenty of books and plenty of other, people available there. Everybody has their own opinion about what the serpent is because that's the nature of the serpent. Everybody sees something different in it. And, my God, it's just a marvelous thing.
Wow. Awesome. Yeah, Hugh Newman's no stranger to Capricorn Radio. He's a good friend as well. Looking forward to doing a TV interview with Hugh Newman pretty soon. And yeah, I love what Hugh does. He from megalithic sites all around the world, he's done a wealth of attention to it. And he's currently in Göbekli Tepe at the moment, and all being well, I speak to him when he's home. Him and Andrew Collins. I know Andrew's a good friend of yours as well. So it's interesting times we're in, Ross, and there's people, out there working hard at bringing attention. And I think you've done a wealth of yourself, Ross, for Serpent Mound. You really have. You
bet your life, James. You betcha. Yeah. You're absolutely right on there. I mean, boy, just being on your show, I can feel the electricity, It's happening.
Wow.
It's men like you and your lovely assistant. Is it Zima?
Jana.
Yeah. I want to, thank you for all your silent help. It's people like you that are going to make this happen and reach out to everybody that needs to hear about it.
Yeah. Well, listen, I thank you for your time today, Ross. It's been an absolutely intelligent, spiritual conversation, and I really thoroughly enjoyed it, as well as, putting the information out there about Serpent Mound and learning a bit today. So I thank you for your time today, Ross.
Thank you.